stuff, but you couldn't do it before because state law said that not only could you not order bourbon, but you couldn't order any alcohol except for small farm wineries in Kentucky. And a lot of states have wine, and that's it. There's a few states, I think 8 in Washington, D.C., that before we allowed it would allow the shipment of spirits. And in 2020, we went, as I like to say, from 0 to 100 miles an hour. We went, you can do spirits, you can do wine, you can do beer. Pretty much, we treat it all the same, which is something we've worked on since I became chairman of licensing and occupations 5 years ago. And it was a complicated bill. It was one of the harder things I've done, and couldn't have done it without Christy Trout Van Tatenhove on staff, who was really the brains behind the operation. And I was just the pretty face that worked it up front. But it took a lot of work, and I didn't get everything I wanted, but I got most of it, and people can now order directly from the producer in Kentucky or in other parts of the country. And now I think we're over 15 states in the country who are now taking up legislation to allow shipment of spirits. And that's really what it was about, was opening up other places in the country, not just for our bourbon industry, but for all our alcohol providers. I mean, if somebody comes to Louisville, loves what they had at Against the Grain Brewery, and wants to order some, they'll be able to do that now. A lot of it stemmed from the regulations that were promulgated by the Alcohol Beverage Control, and they read some of the language differently than what we read it when we passed it, and certainly what we intended, and we spoke with them. And heck, I think in September, when they had their public hearing, September 2020, I testified and said, hey, this is not what we meant. This is not what we meant. This is not what we meant. And they went forward with those things, and it just put up more barriers that made it more difficult. And one of those barriers, kind of the biggest one, was not allowing the use of fulfillment centers, which is if you want to order wine from someplace like Napa Valley, most of those companies contract with a third party called a fulfillment center, and they just make the wine and they drop it off there, and they wait for the orders to come in, and the fulfillment center ships them out. The ABC didn't think that was legal under the bill, so we made it abundantly clear that it was. And we provided some other small things like, obviously when you have a new release as a distillery, you want people to write about it on all these whiskey magazines and Wine Aficionado and whatnot. And so we allow them to ship product directly to these folks who can
the media.
The media, exactly. In order to write about it, assume before they had to ship it to a wholesaler who then ran it through a retailer or something in a lot of these states. And so that was an issue. And also we had to make some clarifications because we put in some language regarding the 3-tier system in other states and what was and was not a producer. This is getting in the weeds, but the long and short of it is the regulators wanted to define what a producer was from our end, and every state has somewhat different rules and regulations as to what is and isn't a producer. And we basically said whatever that state says a producer is good enough for us, because we don't want those states telling us what is and isn't a producer in our own state, and we're not going to do that to them. So that was kind of the highlights of the cleanup language from this year.